Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going back in time, back to 1982, and to the Norfolk Naval Base in Virginia. This is the story of Pamela Kimbru.
It's a case that really gets to you, especially when you consider the time and the place.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine, right? I mean, picture this young woman, full of life and excited about her future, ready for a new adventure. That was Pamela.
And Norfolk.
Yeah.
Even back then, it was the largest naval base in the U.S., like a city within a city, bustling,
Exactly. You'd think it would be one of the safest places you could be.
you'd think. But that wasn't the case for Pamela.
Sadly, no. In March of that year, Pamela vanished from the base in the middle of the night, and then the day after she disappeared, her car was found.
Submerged in the Chesapeake Bay.
Yeah, and Pamela was found dead inside.
A tragic discovery that sent shockwaves through the base and beyond.
Absolutely. It shook everyone to the core. And as the investigation began, they had to deal with a lot of obstacles right from the start.
Like that dense fog that blanketed the whole area that night.
Right. Made it almost impossible to see anything, let alone find any potential witnesses.
Complicated the search. And then there were the details. The unsettling details they found at the crime scene.
Like that, what was it? They called it a crude rape kit.
Yeah, in the backseat of her car. Suggested this wasn't just a random act.
No, it pointed to something more sinister, something premeditated. And then there was the autopsy.
Revealed Pamela's cause of death was drowning.
Meaning she was likely alive when the car went into the water?
Alive and trapped.
Heartbreaking. So I have to ask, what's it like investigating a crime on a military base? Especially one as massive as Norfolk.
Well, for starters, it's a whole different world than a civilian investigation.
How so?
Well, you've got layers of jurisdiction. You've got the military police, you've got NCIS, and sometimes even the FBI gets involved.
That's like a bureaucratic nightmare.
Oh, it can be. Each agency has its own procedures, its own priorities.
So it's like trying to solve a puzzle with pieces scattered across different departments.
Exactly. And then you have the sheer scale of the base itself. Back then, we're talking tens of thousands of personnel. Plus, the possibility of outsiders getting access. It's a lot of ground to cover.
Not to mention the limited technology they had back in '82.
Right. No DNA databases, no sophisticated surveillance systems. They had to rely on good old-fashioned detective work.
Shoe leather and instinct.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Countless interviews, painstakingly combing through logs and records, trying to piece together a timeline.
Sounds exhausting.
It was. And to add to the complexity, there was the Cold War context.
Oh, right. Espionage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Tensions with the Soviet Union were at their peak. And Pamela's work,
Yeah.
well, it involved sensitive communications.
So naturally, they had to consider the possibility that her disappearance was linked to something bigger, maybe even a foreign intelligence operation.
The stakes were high. And just to give you an idea of the climate back then, this was around the same time the Walker spy ring was uncovered.
Wow. So espionage was a real and present danger.
Absolutely. It was a factor they couldn't ignore.
So they're dealing with a potential espionage case, they're sifting through thousands of potential suspects, and then another theory emerges. The vampire rapist.
Yeah, about a year after Pamela's death, another young woman, Carolyn Molnar, was found murdered on the same base.
Chilling. What was it about these cases that led them to consider a serial killer?
Both women had been strangled, and this vampire rapist they were looking at in Florida had a particular MO. He was known to drain the blood of his victims after killing them.
That's horrifying. What made him a suspect in Pamela's case, though?
His name was John Brennan Critchley, and he had worked as a contractor at the Norfolk base around the time Pamela disappeared.
Putting him right in the mix.
Right in the middle of it.
So they had espionage, a potential serial killer, and a massive naval base to contend with. Did they find anything concrete? Anything that connected any of those threads to Pamela's murder?
Unfortunately, no. They investigated every angle, but the evidence just wasn't there. The case went cold.
But the story doesn't end there, does it?
No. The case was eventually reopened in 1995.
Reopened. By who?
An NCIS agent named Joe Kennedy. And he was a man driven by a very personal mission.
What do you mean?
Well, Kennedy had experienced a tremendous amount of loss in his own life. 5 family members all gone within a short span of time.
Oh, wow.
That's tragic. And that loss fueled his passion for seeking justice for families like Pamela's. He wanted to offer them some kind of resolution.
So for him, it was more than just solving a crime.
Much more. It was personal. And when he took on Pamela's cold case, he brought a fresh perspective. He He was meticulous, methodical.
And he was particularly interested in something he called post-defense behavior.
Yeah, it's a fascinating concept. The idea that a suspect's life might change after they've committed a crime. They might withdraw, exhibit signs of guilt, or even change their habits.
Almost like they're subconsciously trying to deal with the weight of what they've done.
Exactly. And Kennedy believed that analyzing these behavioral patterns could provide valuable insights.
So he's not just looking at the crime scene, but also at the ripples the crime creates in a person's life.
Precisely. And did it lead him to new suspects in Pamela's case? Well, let's just say one name from the initial investigation started to stand out.
And that name was?
Richard Whittle.
It's a haunting thought, isn't it? All those families out there still searching for answers, still hoping for justice, as the years go by and the trail runs cold.
It makes you appreciate the dedication of those folks working those cold case units.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sifting through all that old evidence, re-interviewing witnesses, memories fading over time, chasing leads that have gone stale.
It takes a special kind of person to do that work. Someone who really believes in the power of truth. Someone with real empathy for the families left behind.
Agent Kennedy definitely fit the bill. I'm curious, though, about this focus on post-defense behavior. It's a fascinating idea, but is it really a reliable way to pinpoint a suspect? I mean, couldn't someone's life just fall apart for reasons that have nothing to do with a crime? It's a valid point, and it's something that's been debated for years by criminologists. While it's not foolproof, it can be a useful tool, especially in cold cases where the traditional leads have dried up. Think about it. Committing a crime, especially a violent crime, it leaves a mark on you, psychologically. I mean, guilt, anxiety, paranoia, all those emotions, they can manifest in different ways.
Yeah, changing behavior, relationships, even how you look.
Right. So it's not a smoking gun, but it can give you clues
Yeah.
about a suspect's state of mind,
Yeah.
and potentially back up other evidence.
And in Whittle's case, his post-defense behavior did seem to line up with Kennedy's profile.
It did, didn't it? That downward spiral, the substance abuse, the erratic behavior, it all painted the picture of a man struggling with a very heavy burden.
Almost like he was drawn to getting caught, like the guilt was eating away at him.
It's a theory, definitely. Some psychologists think that the subconscious mind seeks to resolve guilt, even if it means self-sabotage.
Another thing that strikes me about this case is that whole Cold War backdrop. We've got the specter of espionage, the threat of Soviet infiltration. I imagine that must added a whole other layer to the investigation.
It definitely complicates things. Imagine trying to solve a murder when you have to factor in potential national security threats. Most homicide detectives never have to deal with that level of complexity.
It's a reminder that even the most seemingly straightforward crimes can be tied up with these larger forces, political tensions, historical events. It's all connected.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it underscores the importance of having investigators who are not only good detectives, but also have that broader awareness of geopolitics and history.
And in Pamela's case, it seems like they didn't just fixate on one theory, right? They explored espionage, they looked into the serial killer angle, and ultimately they focused on Whittle.
That's the sign of a thorough investigation. You have to keep an open mind. Consider all the possibilities, even the ones that seem a bit far-fetched. Follow the evidence wherever it leads, even if it takes you down some unexpected paths.
Speaking of unexpected paths, that envelope trick, that was brilliant. I mean, to think that something so simple like asking someone to lick an envelope could crack open a murder case?
It's amazing, isn't it? A testament to the power of creative thinking outside the box. And of course, meticulous planning. Every detail matters. One misstep, one oversight, and the whole thing could have unraveled.
And it makes you wonder what other innovative methods are being used to crack these cold cases.
I'm sure there are all sorts of new techniques being developed with all the advances in technology. But what remains essential is human intuition, that ability to connect the dots, see the patterns.
You mentioned earlier about the psychological burden of committing a crime. Do you think that played a role in Whittle's confession?
It's hard to know for sure, but it's definitely possible. I mean, the weight of his actions, all those years carrying that secret, it could have been eating away at him, leading him to subconsciously look for a way out, a release.
And the fact that he confessed to the attack, but not the murder itself, was that his way of rationalizing what he did? Maybe to convince himself that he wasn't a murderer.
It's a classic defense mechanism. We see it all the time. People trying to downplay their role, trying to compartmentalize their guilt, create a narrative that allows them to live with themselves.
But in Whittle's case, the evidence was overwhelming. The DNA, the witnesses, the forensics, it all painted him as Pamela's killer.
In the end, he had to face the music. And while the justice system isn't perfect, in this case, it worked. Pamela's killer was brought to justice. Her family finally saw some kind of closure.
A bittersweet closure, though, right? Because even though Pamela's case was solved, Carolyn's murder remains unsolved.
That's the thing about justice. It's not always neat and tidy. For Carolyn's family, the search for answers continues.
It's heartbreaking to think that while one family finds some peace, another is left with the unknown. All those unanswered questions just hanging there.
And it reminds us that these cases go beyond just catching the bad guy. It's about providing answers for those left behind. Helping them make sense of what happened, giving them some sense that their loved one has not been forgotten.
It's about honoring the victim, acknowledging the impact their loss has had on everyone.
And ensuring justice, not just for the victims, but for all of us. For society.
Pamela's case shows us the power of perseverance, that we should never give up hope. And it reminds us of the dedication of those who work tirelessly to bring closure to cold cases. But it's also a story about loss, the enduring pain of a life cut short, and how the ripple effects of violence stretch far and wide.
It's a story that reminds us that even in the safest places, darkness can find a way in. And it highlights the challenges, the complexity of these cold case investigations. The pain of loss, the enduring pain, and the importance of seeking truth and justice no matter how long it takes.
So now, as we shift our focus to the unsolved case of Carolyn Molnar, what are your initial thoughts? Do you see any connection to Pamela's case, or is this something else entirely?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The fact that they were both murdered on the same base, not that far apart in time, well, it makes you wonder. But then we have that DNA evidence. Whittle's DNA wasn't a match for Carolyn's case.
So we have these intriguing similarities, but also some key differences. It's hard to ignore that.
It really is. It's like we're starting a whole new puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
But we might be missing some pieces, and some might not even belong.
As we dig into Carolyn's case, I'm curious what other theories might come up, and if there are any common threads that connect these two tragedies.
I'm right there with you. It's a case that's baffled investigators for decades. Maybe by looking at it through the lens of Pamela's case, something new will come to light.
It's a reminder that these cold case investigations, they can be so intricate. And sometimes, even with everyone's best efforts, the truth stays hidden. It really takes you back, doesn't it? To a time when things felt so uncertain. The Cold War, espionage, that whole vampire rapist thing. It must have been a scary time to be at Norfolk.
Absolutely. Imagine living and working in a place where you're constantly on edge, wondering if you're a target.
It's easy to get lost in the details, the investigation, the evidence, the court stuff. But at the end of the day, 2 young women lost their lives.
That's what we can't forget. Pamela and Carolyn, they were more than just victims. They were people with lives, with dreams.
Pamela's case was solved, but there's still this lingering sadness. What is it about these cold cases that grabs us, even after all these years?
I think it's the mystery of it all. The loose ends. We want answers. We're hardwired for closure. And when we don't get it, it sticks with us.
In Carolyn's case, well, that's a perfect example. So many unanswered questions. It must be incredibly tough on her family and friends.
It's hard to fathom that kind of pain. Pamela's family had the legal system. They saw justice done. But Carolyn's family, they're left with this void.
And knowing Whittle's DNA wasn't a match, it adds another layer to it all. It's like we're dealing with a whole different situation now.
Like having 2 puzzles. But some of the pieces are missing, or they don't even belong. It makes it incredibly difficult to figure out.
And it raises the possibility that there's another killer out there. Someone who got away with it.
It's a chilling thought, no doubt. And it weighs heavily on investigators. They have to explore every avenue, chase every lead, leave no stone unturned.
Do you think there's a chance these 2 cases could be related, even without the DNA link?
It's not impossible. Both women were murdered on the same base and within a relatively short time frame. Maybe there's a common thread we haven't found yet. A shared acquaintance, a place they both went, something like that.
Or maybe something even more subtle, like a pattern of behavior, something that connects the crimes but hasn't been spotted yet.
Like a hidden code?
Yeah.
You have to look beyond the obvious. The smallest detail could be the key.
Trying to solve a cold case is kind of like trying to put a broken mirror back together. You've got all these fragments, but some are missing, some are damaged. The picture's never going to be perfect.
That's a great way to put it. And it highlights how important it is to understand the bigger picture. It's not just about the pieces, it's about how they fit into the whole.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into these cases, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to take away from all this?
To remember Pamela and Carolyn, remember their families, and how these crimes impacted everyone. It's easy to get caught up in the facts and the theories, but we can't forget the human side of it all.
And to understand that justice isn't always simple, Pamela's family got closure through the courts, but Carolyn's family is still waiting. There are no easy answers in these cases, and sometimes no resolution.
But even when the answers are elusive, we can still try to understand. We can honor the victims, and we can hold on to hope that one day the truth will come out.
We'll leave our listener with this thought. The cases of Pamela Kimbru and Carolyn Molnar remind us that even in places that feel safe, danger can still find a way in. These cases show how complicated cold case investigations can be, the lasting pain of loss, and the importance of never giving up on the search for truth and justice.